Russia launches a massive combined strike on Ukraine, sending waves of missiles and drones toward Kyiv and hitting fuel, logistics, and industrial infrastructure across the surrounding region. Trump opens what he calls an unprecedented economic war on Iran, threatening countries, banks, and companies that continue providing Tehran with access to trade and finance. Washington moves toward deeper integration of U.S. and European long-range missile systems as NATO expands its precision strike capabilities across the continent. German investigators secure another arrest in the Nord Stream sabotage case, detaining a Ukrainian suspect in Croatia under a European warrant. The USS George Washington heads toward the Middle East to replace Abraham Lincoln, reinforcing the U.S. carrier presence around Iran while temporarily reducing naval capacity in the Western Pacific. India and Germany move closer to an €8 billion submarine agreement that could become one of their largest defense industrial partnerships. And in Leaders on X, South Korea backs conditions for renewed dialogue with Pyongyang, Polish sailors begin submarine training in Sweden, and Israel Katz sharply warns Turkey over its role in Syria. Russia carried out one of the largest combined strikes on Ukraine in recent weeks, with Kyiv and the surrounding region appearing to be the main focus of the attack. Ukrainian monitoring channels published an approximate map of the overnight attack showing missiles and drones approaching targets across Ukraine from several directions. Ukraine's Air Force reported 168 drones and dozens of cruise, ballistic, and other missiles. The heaviest concentration of strikes was reported around Kyiv. Footage from the capital showed repeated powerful explosions during the night, with flashes illuminating the skyline and large fires visible in the distance. Monitoring sources claimed that during one particularly intense phase, around 20 missiles of different types were heading toward Kyiv within roughly 15 minutes. The exact figure has not been independently confirmed, but the footage and air raid monitoring indicated an exceptionally dense wave of incoming weapons. Large fires were also reported across Kyiv region. In the Brovary district, emergency services confirmed fires at 2 fuel infrastructure sites and damage to an industrial facility. Night footage showed a powerful impact followed by a rapidly expanding blaze at what local channels described as a fuel and lubricant storage site. Morning images later showed damaged storage tanks and extensive fire damage across the facility. The Boryspil district was also hit heavily. Ukrainian officials reported fires at several warehouse and logistics sites. Video from near Dudarkiv showed a large warehouse complex engulfed in smoke and flames, with local sources identifying the facility as an FM logistic distribution center. The scale of the fire remained visible well into the morning as emergency crews worked at the site. Another major fire was recorded near Martusivka. Footage filmed from several kilometers away showed a massive column of dark smoke rising above the area, while closer images showed fires spreading through a transport and logistics complex. Russian sources claimed the facility handled dual-use cargo, including components associated with unmanned systems and electronic equipment, although that specific military role has not been independently verified. Taken together, the overnight footage showed a sustained attack concentrated heavily on Kyiv and the surrounding industrial fuel and logistics infrastructure. Ukrainian authorities reported impacts or falling debris at 28 locations nationwide, while fires across the Kyiv region continued for hours after the main strike wave had ended. President Donald Trump has announced what he calls the most crushing economic operation ever imposed on any country, opening a new phase of the U.S. campaign against Iran. In a post released today, Trump said Tehran had failed to use the opportunity for a deal and declared that Washington would now pursue economic warfare and isolation on an unprecedented scale. The new pressure is aimed not only at Iran itself, but also at governments, companies, and financial institutions that continue helping Tehran maintain access to international trade. Trump said any country allowing its banks, businesses, airports, or government entities to provide Iran with what he described as an economic lifeline could face major consequences. He specifically demanded an end to oil smuggling, swap arrangements, cash transfers, exchange houses, ship registries, and front companies used to move Iranian money or commodities. The president described the campaign as an economic D-Day and called on U.S. allies to participate in isolating Iran. He also repeated that Washington will not allow Tehran to obtain a nuclear weapon. Iran rejected the announcement almost immediately. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said the new campaign was an attempt to distract from America's own economic problems, pointing to record U.S. debt and rising interest costs. He argued that doubling down on economic pressure would bring further failure and warned that what he called U.S. economic terrorism threatens both the global economy and the sovereignty of other states. The confrontation is already affecting countries that depend on trade routes around Iran. Iraq has asked Tehran to provide special passage conditions for Iraqi oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz, where restrictions on commercial traffic have sharply reduced Baghdad's ability to export crude through its traditional route. The new U.S. strategy therefore expands the confrontation beyond direct sanctions on Iranian institutions. Washington is now threatening the wider commercial network that allows Iran to sell oil, move money, and maintain international connections, while Tehran is signaling that it intends to resist pressure rather than return immediately to negotiations. The next test will be whether U.S. allies and major trading partners actually enforce the new restrictions, and how aggressively Washington moves against third countries that continue doing business with Iran. That will determine whether the campaign becomes a genuinely global enforcement effort or remains primarily an American pressure strategy. Washington is moving toward deeper integration of American and European long-range missile systems, a step that could change how NATO forces operate across the continent. According to Euractiv, the United States is discussing allowing American missiles to be launched from European multiple-launch rocket systems. At present, NATO operates two partly incompatible families of rocket artillery, limiting how easily ammunition can be shared between U.S. and European units. The proposed change would allow European launchers to fire a wider range of American-made missiles, giving Allied forces greater flexibility and reducing dependence on separate national ammunition chains. A second development is already moving forward. The United States has approved production of ATACMS missiles in Germany for the first time, expanding European involvement in one of the alliance's principal long-range strike systems. The shift comes as NATO continues increasing missile, air defense, and reconnaissance capabilities along its eastern flank. Recent activity over Poland and the Baltic has included advanced combat aircraft and electronic warfare platforms operating close to Russia. The U.S. Army is also planning for much larger stocks of precision rockets. Procurement documents call for up to 133,000 GMLRS rockets through the middle of the next decade. For European NATO members, greater compatibility would mean launchers already deployed on the continent could draw from a broader common stockpile. The next step is whether Washington and European governments formally approve cross-platform missile integration and begin adapting launchers, training, and ammunition supply chains around a common NATO standard. German prosecutors have secured the arrest of a Ukrainian suspect in Croatia over the sabotage of the Nord Stream gas pipelines. The man, identified by prosecutors as Vladimir Z, was detained in the Croatian city of Pula under a European arrest warrant. German investigators describe him as a trained scuba diver and say he is strongly suspected of taking part in the operation that damaged Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 near the Danish island of Bornholm in September 2022. Prosecutors allege that the group used a yacht rented in Germany through intermediaries using false identification documents. Vladimir Z is accused of participating in the dives needed to place explosives on the pipelines. The arrest is especially significant because Germany had tried to detain the same suspect before. He was previously arrested in Poland, but a Polish court rejected Germany's extradition request. German authorities continued pursuing the European warrant, and prosecutors are now seeking his transfer from Croatia. Another Ukrainian suspect, Serhiy K., was arrested in Italy and later extradited to Germany. German prosecutors have already brought charges against him in connection with the pipeline explosions. Ukraine has denied state involvement in the sabotage. The German investigation, however, is increasingly focused on specific Ukrainian suspects rather than the competing theories that surrounded the attack in its early stages. The next step is the Croatian extradition process. If Vladimir Z is transferred to Germany, prosecutors would gain another central suspect in one of Europe's most politically sensitive infrastructure investigations. The USS George Washington Carrier Strike Group is moving toward the Middle East as the U.S. Navy begins rotating its main carrier presence in the region. The carrier recently transited the Singapore Strait and the Strait of Malacca, moving from the western Pacific toward the Indian Ocean. A U.S. official told CBS News that George Washington is heading to the Middle East to replace USS Abraham Lincoln, which has been deployed for almost 9 months. The rotation comes as Washington continues maintaining a heavy naval presence around Iran. George Washington normally serves as the Navy's forward-deployed carrier in Japan, so moving it west temporarily reduces the carrier presence available in the western Pacific. That creates a second strategic effect. The Navy is reinforcing its Middle East posture while accepting a temporary gap in a region where China remains one of Washington's main military competitors. George Washington brings a full carrier air wing and supporting warships, giving U.S. commanders another platform for air operations, surveillance, and protection of maritime routes. Once the group reaches its new operating area, the deployment also keeps a U.S. carrier continuously available as tensions around Iran and Gulf shipping remain elevated. The next step is the handover with Abraham Lincoln. Once that rotation is completed, Lincoln can begin leaving the region while George Washington assumes the carrier mission supporting U.S. operations in the Middle East. India and Germany are moving closer to finalizing one of their largest defense industrial agreements, centered on 6 new submarines for the Indian Navy. The program, known as Project 75 India, is expected to involve Germany's ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems and India's Mazagon Dock shipbuilders. German officials have said the agreement could be signed soon, with the overall value estimated at around €8 billion. The submarines would be based on the German Type 214 design and built largely in India. A central requirement is air-independent propulsion, allowing conventional submarines to remain submerged for longer periods without surfacing to recharge batteries. The project is also structured around technology transfer. TKMS would provide design, engineering, and technical support, while Mazagon Dock would take responsibility for construction and delivery to the Indian Navy. For India, the deal would expand its conventional submarine fleet while increasing domestic shipbuilding capacity. For Germany, it would make the program a flagship defense partnership with one of Asia's largest naval powers. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius has described the submarine project as a potential centerpiece of bilateral defense cooperation. The remaining step is final approval and contract signing. Once completed, attention will shift to technology transfer, construction schedules, and how quickly the first boats can enter Indian service. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung says Seoul supports efforts to create conditions for renewed dialogue with North Korea, including the reduction of some joint exercises with the United States. He also says South Korea is increasing defense spending toward 3.5% of GDP and should take greater responsibility for its own security. Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz says Polish sailors have begun training in Sweden to prepare the future crew of an A-17 submarine. The first stage includes combat medicine, anti-sabotage defense, and evacuation procedures, followed by simulator training and work directly aboard the submarine. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz has sharply criticized Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan over Ankara's role in Syria. Katz says Erdogan is dragging Turkey into dangerous adventures and warns that Israel will not allow any actor to create what it considers a threat to its security.